Chapter 18. A bad relationship, trying to build a business, and the scars of probation. I might have had a home. I might have had a hefty lump sum of cash, but the thought of connecting with anyone felt like an impossible dream. The concept of being loved was beyond my grasp. How could I connect with anyone after everything that had torn me apart? My self-worth lay in ruins, obliterated by injustice, crushed under the weight of loneliness, and suffocated by the relentless branding of something I wasn't. Then Amanda crashed into my life, a street person just like me. The sequence of events might be muddled in my mind, but I met Amanda before the $30,000 lump sum disability payout found its way into my possession. I remember that because once the money arrived, I tried to sever ties with the suffocating identity of homelessness. It took me far too long to realize she was trapped in the clutches of a crack addiction, and that she was a sociopath in disguise. At the men's shelter, where the air was thick with desperation, 3 meals a day were served. There I encountered a cast of characters etched in the harsh lines of survival. Mike stood out, seeming more like a volunteer than a fellow wanderer of the streets. His full story remained a mystery, but he carved a different role amidst the usual throng seeking sustenance. I saw him repeatedly at meetings where companies, agencies, and the community grappled with the behemoth of homelessness. Janet was a fixture there too, clinging to her camper as a makeshift home, desperately parking wherever she could. Wanda, another regular, came for meals, her own car an elusive dream for me until my mother passed. Bob lived out of his van, and then there was Eddie. Once they caught wind of my good fortune, everyone seemed poised to become visitors or overnight lodgers. They never asked how long they could stay, but the truth was there were strict limits on how long someone could actually reside with me. I had been given a house to rent, and my share of the rent was determined by my Social Security income. The rules forbade me from having others live with me, even if I entertained the idea of transforming my new dwelling into another homeless shelter. Yet I couldn't forget the haunting familiarity of being homeless myself. As for Amanda, I had crossed paths with her at the homeless shelter before. It hadn't dawned on me then that her slender frame was maintained through the use of crack. Only in hindsight did the pieces fall into place. Was she interested in me? I wasn't certain. Then, in an uncharacteristic moment of impulse, I leaned in to kiss her one afternoon. It wasn't romance, nor was it connection. It happened there on Franklin Street, a bustling street teeming with students and passers-by. The kiss wasn't forceful. It was driven by a hunger, a longing for closeness, for validation that I was still human, capable of feeling something beyond the numbing ache of isolation. She seemed slightly surprised. I had dabbled in dating during the early 2000s via online platforms, but the gravity of the charges against me led me to believe I was only deemed acceptable to society's outcasts. With a new home in the safety of Carborough, VR was set to help me embark on a home-based business. Yet life felt devoid of anything I truly desired. I had left engineering behind long ago. Sure, I was a geek who marveled at technology, but that didn't mean I wanted to create anything that ran on a computer or the web. The excitement was there, but it didn't translate into a desire to be part of the creation of new technologies or the latest websites. At this juncture, I was just going along with what I thought might bring me joy. I had to craft my own hypnotic scripts to convince myself that I enjoyed this path and that I could find success and happiness. But deep down, I was torn, uncertain if this was truly what I wanted. I should have known that working with computers or writing software for websites was not a good match for me at all. I had learned that about myself long ago. I can't forget the lump sum payment of $30,000 by inviting Amanda into my life with her drug addiction. Little by little, I was being drained of that money. She was good at scheming and manipulation. She always had some lie about why she needed money. Of course, I didn't know this at first. I clung to a false notion that there was something positive about the relationship with Amanda, completely oblivious to the fact that she was draining me, like a parasitic vampire, exploiting my vulnerability and loneliness to fund her own destructive habits. I clung to this relationship because I saw myself as wretched and marked with a scarlet letter, and so even an unhealthy relationship or connection was better than utter isolation. I was drowning in internal pain, overwhelmed with isolation and loneliness. Yet I was never like Amanda. I was not someone who used and hurt others. That was part of her character, and I wish I'd seen it earlier. Desperate to create the illusion of a better life, I splurged on a few luxuries. I remember heading to Best Buy with conflicted joy to pick up a large widescreen TV and speakers designed to flood my living room with surround sound. The Geek Squad even came in, setting up speakers, running wires to each speaker, running lines through the attack to speakers mounted on the ceiling, and even fitted it with a booming subwoofer that promised an immersive experience. But as I gathered with Bob and a few other friends, crashing on my couch and watching King Kong in 4K with that surround sound extravaganza, a bitter part of me wondered if I had merely traded one kind of emptiness for another. I cursed myself for not keeping some of that money secure in savings, for not making a more pragmatic investment like buying a car. Ironically, it took the long shadow of losing my mother some 15 years later for me to finally purchase a car, the care package I denied myself back then. I couldn't understand why, after receiving the $30,000, I had not invested in a car which should have been a priority. My yearning for connection was a double-edged sword. I desperately opened my home to people, perhaps too freely, letting them assume it was theirs to use, without any regard for my own well-being. I'd tasted the pain of homelessness, and I clung to the belief that everyone deserved a home. Yet I was constantly reminded of the rules, warnings from Vanessa in particular, that no one was allowed to live there. Whether those rules came from Section 8 or the local Shelter Plus care program, they were clear. Visitors were fine, but no one could stay beyond a mere 2 weeks. And here I was, making decisions, failing to speak up or consider what I needed. My couches became beds for those who would otherwise sleep in their cars or vans. At different times, it was Wanda on one couch, Bob on another, and Mike somewhere else. Bob had his van, and so he just brought inside his own portable bed. I was completely passive during all this. I felt compassion for everyone and a certain obligation to share my good fortune of having a home with those who were not given this. I wasn't thinking about either what I had to do or what I wanted. At some point, Eddie, whom I met at the IFC shelter where I went for meals, promised to pay rent to me, to use the room that had once been a quasi-office. Now, as I write this, it serves as my bedroom. For a while, that space was where Eddie stayed, complicating my ability to run the computer web design and development business, with him sleeping there. Despite being homeless, Eddie had an uncanny confidence with women, a trait I lacked. So it wasn't just Eddie in that room, but also his girlfriend S. Oitz. This was the same room that housed the essential computers for my home-based business. Then there was Mike, who somehow inserted himself into the new home-based web design venture. He didn't have any particular skills, yet it seemed web design and development didn't require a 4-year degree. My web design certificate was just that, a certificate not even as comprehensive as an associate's 2-year degree. Initially, I welcomed Mike's involvement. At first, it's not like we didn't get any business. How about that? I said we, but with VR's support, it was, as far as they knew, my business. We called it Future Wave Designs, initially, then Future Wave Web Development. The shift to web development involved more technical aspects, like hosting websites on Linux-based servers. Web development also required deeper involvement in coding, from CSS to JavaScript to server-side PHP coding. Throughout all this, I was torn. On one hand, I had long known my true passion lay in social-oriented careers and creative pursuits, learned as far back as the 80s. Yet here I was, caught in this web of software and servers, unsure if this was where I truly belonged. Web design seemed like it should satisfy the creative side of me, but I couldn't quite grasp it. The software and tools felt overwhelmingly complex, and I didn't genuinely enjoy the process. Yet I found myself making self-hypnosis recordings to convince myself to embrace this new reality, a reality where I supposedly found joy in software engineering. Engineering used to be about creating tangible things, but with the internet's rise, design shifted towards the aesthetics of a website. It was more artistic, yet web design or design in general required mastery of the tools involved. In a way, it wasn't unlike a musician needing to play an instrument. In this bewildering new world, where I felt increasingly lost, I thought perhaps I should rely on my programming skills, or coding, as it was now called. My background in electrical engineering and computer engineering, with all its rigorous programming, might be my saving grace. Maybe it would earn me the respect of my family, a respect I had once deemed unnecessary. There had been a time when I could see my family clearly and had abandoned the desire for their approval. But now I felt adrift, as if I were nobody. That was a different life, a different reality. I was being compelled to embrace something else entirely. I was caught in the struggle to reshape my entire existence. Who I was and what I yearned for seemed futile. I once had love, dreams, hopes, and ambitions, but now I labored under a burden of shame I never deserved. Rationally, I knew I had done nothing wrong, yet realistically, I knew others would see a different narrative. If I wanted my clinical license back, they would see my criminal history. If I wanted to work in the helping professions, they would see my criminal history. It felt like a stain that would never fade. I was in a constant battle to program my mind to accept this grim reality, yet part of me resisted, unwilling to surrender entirely. There was a suffocating despair that things would never improve or change. The justice system is a cold, unyielding machine that disregards the potential for revisiting and rectifying errors. Sure, if I were locked away in a physical prison or languishing on death row for a crime I hadn't committed, there might be a glimmer of hope in the form of appeals. But honestly, I wasn't even sharing my story back then like I am now. Maybe it would have made a difference when witnesses' memories weren't yet shadows of the past. The crushing weight of undeserved shame forced me to suffer in silence. Eddie had wreaked havoc when he left, sowing chaos with a malicious grin. He deceived the police into believing that some of my possessions belonged to him. In those early years after the conviction, I was a pariah in Carborough. The police, complicit in Eddie's treachery, assisted in the theft of my belongings, a bike and several other items he falsely claimed as his. Then, in a twisted act of malice, Eddie went to the magistrate with an insane accusation that I was consuming my cat's feces. It was a claim so absurd it might have been laughable if it hadn't been so gravely serious. I was nearly driven to the edge. contemplating giving up my next cat because it dared to defecate indoors. My stomach was a fragile fortress, crumbling at the mere attempt to clean the foul mess. Anyway, my ordeal at the emergency room was brief. Mike, still a steadfast ally in my life, stood by me throughout the nightmare. Time has blurred the exact details, but I do remember the harsh reality. Once a commitment order is issued, you're trapped, waiting for a psychiatric evaluation. If someone merely suspects you're suicidal, it doesn't unfold like this. With a commitment order from the police, they slap handcuffs on you, shove you into a police car, and haul you to the emergency room. After what felt like an eternity of humiliation, they finally released me and I trudged home, each step heavy with the weight of injustice, probation, and the shame that lingered. The plea deal I never wanted had left me with 2 years of probation. I couldn't leave the state for that long. I met with my probation officer just as scheduled, once a week, speaking as little as I could, swallowing my shame in silence. My silence mirrored the deeply embedded shame and low self-worth that permeated my entire being. One day they came to my home for a home visit. "This is for your safety," they said as they put handcuffs on me in my own home. No one else was there to witness my humiliation. That was the only mercy. They searched my home, looking for, what? Some kind of proof that I was the monster the system claimed I was? Who knows? It didn't have to make any sense. They found catnip. I had a cat that I named Buffy, after Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I suppose the catnip looked like pot. I said, "That's not, it's catnip." One of them responded with statement of disbelief. "Where's the cat?" I had plenty of photos of Buffy, and so I pointed to a photo of my cat and deadpanned, "See? Cat." I was drowning in shame. But at my last probation meeting, something shifted. Supervised probation was ending. I looked my probation officer in the eye and finally told her the truth. I never did any of the things I was accused of. I expected skepticism. I expected dismissal. Instead, she just looked at me. And in that moment, I knew she believed me. Maybe not enough to change anything, but enough to see me. And that was more than most ever had. Perhaps because I wasn't giving anyone a chance. I was too ashamed. The end of things with Amanda. Amanda could insinuate herself into my life because I was desperate for a connection. I wasn't just lonely. I was terrified of being alone. I should have paid attention. Amanda wasn't around much. It would take me a while to realize that she had been out somewhere getting high all the time. For a while, Mike was the most consistent fixture in my life. He played a role like that of a business partner. He was a hulking person at 6.5 feet or more. Eventually, he would become a threat to me. There was a moment when it all hit me. Amanda was using me. She had no real interest in me, only what I could give her, and I gave too much. I was ashamed that I had not seen this earlier. Amanda was never around. The realization hit like a slow, sickening wave. I don't even know what was the wake-up call. One would seem to be able to remember that, but the truth was that I had not really been able to connect with anyone during this time because I assumed no lady would be interested in someone with a violent criminal history, even if it was all lies, even if I had been the victim. So maybe I just told myself that there was something positive about having Amanda in my life. What the hell was wrong with me? At some point after I knew that Amanda was out of my life, I saw a photo of her in a newspaper. It was about the homeless in Chapel Hill. Mostly good people, but the photograph mostly drew me to her eyes. This would be the inspiration for one of the poems in a collection that I wrote with Scott Urban, who was living down in Wilmington. Scott wrote dark poetry that was infused with the imagery from the horror genre. I'm getting ahead of my story here. The break-in. Amanda left my life as unceremoniously as she had entered it by telling me how much better her new boyfriend was in bed. I felt pathetic forever letting her in. I did not care about her. I just wanted a connection and human contact. She didn't tell me she was leaving, but somehow I learned that she was heading to Florida. Then one day, I came home to find my house broken into. The front bedroom window was shattered. The home office I had set up for my website design and development business was where she entered the home. I didn't have to wonder who did this. The only thing missing was the laptop and perhaps a few other items. The police dusted for prints. This was unusual. Often the police avoided getting involved in minor crimes that didn't involve grave physical harm or the theft of expensive items. This window would have offered some concealment from the neighbors. The important fact was that Amanda had stolen my laptop. The police weren't going to go looking for her, but at least they dusted for fingerprints. It wouldn't matter. She had left the entire state. The setup that could have destroyed me. Early 2008. I was half awake at 3 a.m. when I sensed something was wrong. A movement outside my window. I went to the side entrance of my home. Then I saw them. 4 police officers, guns drawn, pointed down, but ready. They stormed my house, moving from room to room, even searching the attic. What the hell was happening? This was surreal. How could my life become more bizarre? This was actually happening. It was beyond crazy. None of them were telling me anything. I sat at my computer, watching as one officer walked up to me and said, "Look at your MySpace account." Okay, I can do that. And what I saw made my blood run cold. It said I was holding a little girl hostage. That is what it said on my MySpace page. If I had written it myself, as if I was bragging about it. Obviously, Amanda had done this, fighting back. The next day they came back with a court order to seize all my computers and electronic devices. The false conviction I never deserved was being used as justification for a fishing expedition. The court order allowed them to look for child pornography. The content of the information on MySpace said that I had a girl that I was holding, and it referenced the school up the street from me. The plea deal didn't include the sexual component of the crime that was alleged originally. However, in my mind, that mere accusation stood not as truth, but as reality. Note that I have described this distinction repeatedly. Truth is about what really is. Reality is what we come to believe about the world and people. I spoke to my friend Wanda, who had coincidentally moved to Florida as well. She had made the phone call to the police. She thought I was in danger. That is why she called the police. But the story took on a life of its own. This time I had some funds and I hired a lawyer. My lawyer later told me what one officer had asked him. "How can you represent someone like him?" That sentence haunted me. This was so crazy, so surreal. I had been transformed into a villain, which was the exact opposite of who I truly was. I had been a therapist who helped vulnerable people. I had given up on engineering because all that mattered to me was helping others. Yet, in the eyes of a police detective in Carborough, I was some villain that no one should want to help. They didn't look at the hundreds of lives I made better. Anna had erased that and made the actions of Amanda believable. After many weeks, we traced the IP address. It was from a library in Florida, and I was able to realize that Amanda had fled after robbing me. It was hard to believe that she had memorized the password to my account. She was using a public computer in Florida. She had done this. At the same time, on the same day that my lawyer had this proof, the police gave me back my computer. But there was no apology. They had been ready to believe the worst. eager to believe it. I felt like no one saw the real me. They only saw the conviction, the label, the lie, insight from this latest villain to cross my path. After this harrowing incident, my curiosity about psychopaths and sociopaths exploded into a desperate need. I had encountered at least 3 malevolent figures who wreaked havoc on my life, and I had grossly underestimated their destructive capabilities. It became imperative for me to arm myself with knowledge to shield against these predatory individuals. The first psychopath who invaded my world was that insidious John F., masquerading as a therapist with an air of false expertise. He thrived on chaos and the suffering of others. If anyone actually got better, they would not need him. He preferred to leave people shattered and spiraling further into despair without a glimmer of remorse or concern for others. He obliterated my life when I was at my most vulnerable. Then came Anna, the central figure of this book, whose malevolence knew no bounds. Lastly, there was Amanda, another remorseless antagonist. A few other lesser characters also left a trail of damage in their wake. I picked up books about sociopaths and psychopaths. This included books about sociopaths, psychopaths, fear, awareness, and the criminal mind. It also included books about infamous psychopaths who are known for their crimes. I needed to understand evil